All right. Well, hello there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. I'm so excited to have another healthcare human conversation with someone that we've connected with online here. And actually, I would love if you could introduce yourself, Koshin. What do you want people on the podcast to know about you?
Mm. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Joan. And my name is Koshin Paley Ellison. I'm the president and co-guiding teacher of the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care. And maybe the most important thing to know about me is that I am deeply committed to service, and the service in particular of the values that we actually all know that we have, and actually how I'm bringing that together with our words and our actions. So how do we actually have that integrated life? And here at the Zen Center, we do that by being uncomfortable and learning how to find comfort amidst the discomfort so that we can go through it to actually have real change. And we do that through our contemplative medicine fellowship and through our Zen practice and 90-day practice periods where people get a chance to kind of dive deeper into what does it mean to actually put your stake in the ground and learn how to be still in the midst of pain and discomfort.
Such like essential qualities. I mean, just for being a human on the planet. And then certainly in work in healthcare, where we are seeing other humans in the midst of their pain and suffering. And yet, for myself, trained in medicine, like not really named as part of the curriculum per se, maybe in bits and pieces. And there's this thing we talk about, the hidden curriculum in medicine, where really what was modeled and kind of almost through shame and fear-based tactics taught to me was like, keep your discomfort to yourself. If you feel too uncomfortable or too emotional or if you reveal too much uncertainty, those are weaknesses you should hide. Like there's all these things about how we're supposed to perform for patients and for colleagues in medicine. And then talk about additional suffering when you're just trying to be with the people in the suffering. Um, that's just what resonates from what you just said. I am curious with this fellowship and like how you and your organization came to embrace contemplative medicine as a way that you serve people who work in healthcare.
Yeah, so my husband and I are both Buddhist monks and Zen teachers, and also psychoanalytically trained, as well as trained as chaplains. And I'm trained as also as a social worker. Of course, we were inspired by Dame Cicely Saunders, who herself trained as a doctor and a nurse and social worker. So to really just get a wide breadth of training. And during all of that training, we started training physicians and being asked to do that, but first through the palliative care departments, and then family medicine, and then just general medicine. And we're now in the faculty of a number of different medical schools, and through teaching physicians both in the United States and Japan, what we kept hearing again and again was the same struggle, which was, of course, as we know about burnout and drug and alcohol abuse and divorce, and 47% of physicians and nurse practitioners think of leaving the profession the next 3 to 5 years. So all of that has been coming for a long time. And we also were hearing that, oh, I'm so bad at my self-care. Doctors often, because we're kind of spiritual people confessing to us, like, I'm so bad at my self-care. I'm so bad at that. I didn't do yoga or whatever that is. And then lately now people are using that expression, wellness. I'm so bad at my wellness and not doing my wellness activities. So it's just changing the word from self-care to wellness. And now also because there's so much focus on self-compassion, people telling us about how bad they are at their self-compassion. And, at a certain level, it's totally funny and it's totally heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And so I think that we just heard it again and again, and also in some of the integrative medicine fellowships that we teach in. It was so poignant to hear, that people were talking about, please, we're just doing some icebreakers and saying, please, cross the line if you're this kind of person or that kind of person, and please cross the line and stand up if you are actually just feeling like your life is not integrated.
Mm.
And everyone stands up, and there's just something about that we began to see. In some ways, that's the same thing that we started to see in medical education is what we saw in spiritual communities and families and at our Zen center, that people don't know how to make that, to bridge the gap. Like I was talking about earlier, like they have these clear values and their actions and words tend to be very far away from that.
Yeah.
And so we thought about like, well, what could we do? How can we participate in our way? Because one of our values of the practice that we receive so much from people that we get to teach and to learn with, and what we really just kept hearing is, oh, we're hurting. We're hurting from the divide.
Mm-hmm.
We're hurting from the division, from even how I'm feeling. Someone recently just told me that it was so painful that they went to like this progressive medical school, and at that school, they were told, well, just turn off your feelings and that they should come back in about 10 or 20 years.
Wow.
And so we thought about like, what are the three qualities that we feel like we could offer? What's the medicine here? And then we realized, well, that's one of the qualities is medicine. And so our friend Tarani Lodog, who is an amazing physician and midwife and martial artist and herbalist, and she's our medical director for our fellowship, and just she as an Indigenous woman talks about what medicine is. It's what is actually medicinal, that we've forgotten what the word even means, that we practice medicine, but we're not even thinking about what is good medicine. And part of the medicine for us was two things. When the first one was contemplation, like how do we learn how to stop in the midst of things? I remember one of our first fellows, she was a OBGYN, and she attending, and when she was going into fellowship for OBGYN, she had to go in and tell these two parents that the baby was dead. Mm. And they were 8 months pregnant. Mm. And no one had prepared her for that conversation. And she said it was the last time she looked at people in the eye. And she's like, and now that was 20 years ago. Wow. She's like, I don't think I've looked at my patients in the eye for 20 years. And so how do we learn how to contemplate our struggle, learning to lift our eyes in just a real way and just to offer. And so that contemplation is so important. So contemplative medicine really came from those two words coming just together of what could be useful. And then the third one was fellowship, which we really were mammals. Mm-hmm. And we actually need fellowship. And it's just so interesting that medicine and fellowship tend to be words, of course, that most of us in the medical world use, but often forget what they mean. To be in fellowship is to actually feel like that you have a courageous heart next to you, that people have your back, that people are right there walking side by side with you. So really that in many ways, that's where the fellowship came from, was really from listening and from loving the people that we get to learn and teach. And how do we love them up even more, really? And because I feel like that's actually what's needed. And yeah, so we created this curriculum. And so we thought, like, well, let's create this like delicious. It really feels actually like the curriculum itself feels like a direct food program, you know, which I mean, we offer a lot of things, and it's really the one thing that feels like, here's some delicious food. And the curriculum is a year long, and it's grounded in the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism, which starts with in life that there's suffering, that we struggle. And so we start in the beginning of the fellowship with our struggle and with our suffering, with what hurts, and move through until the path. And I would say most of our fellows are not Buddhists, but they're just interested in how do we do this differently? And how do we really learn how to come into contact with our values so that our words and actions meet? And also that I'm attending to my intrapersonal, like what's going on inside me. Mm-hmm. And how are my relationships at home? Do I really nurture friendships? Do I know? And all of that. And for most of our curriculum, it's actually 2/3 of our curriculum is actually about what's happening inside of you and your interpersonal relationships. Yeah. And 1/3 of it is clinical work. Because for us, that's like the gravy. Because then usually that just sorts itself out when we're sorted out.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I was just drinking in everything you just said. I want to just name the beauty of like reclaiming words from medicine, like medicine itself, fellowship, even the word attending that you used, you know, people, the attending physician, and just the beauty of reclaiming things that can feel like they have sharp edges, but give them new meaning is wonderful. And then I wanted to share that absolutely for me, the sort of inner work and outer work process, the inside out way of approaching any kind of change, honestly, certainly a change where you're trying to integrate and show up in an environment in a different way. Having had different courses on like how to motivate people or how to have a smoking cessation conversation, give me the script. Like I often hear actually that a lot when I connect with people in healthcare. They're like, well, what's the right script? What should I say? I don't know how to say it. And it just speaks to thinking that the answers are out there and we're waiting for someone to give us the box versus when you come home to yourself, when you start to even understand who you are outside of everything you've been taught you're supposed to be, it becomes natural because then you're just in a room with another person. I use the word co-creation a lot, like you're just co-creating healthcare with them that serves your values and their values as the patient, you know, and it just sounds like we have similar approaches in that way. And it's so that like one personal story I'll share is during this pandemic thing we had going on, I had some experiences in my personal life of setting boundaries with family members and in ways learning how to really differentiate and hold on to myself and my needs in the face of those that were unhappy with them. And I did that work first in my personal life. And what it meant for my patients is that when they came and their desires or expectations were not something that I had within me to offer, it wasn't that it was like totally easy, but in my mind, I was always like, I just set this with people in my own personal life. Like it just came through so naturally because I had done that work in those interpersonal relationships where it can feel a lot meatier. So just reflecting back to you how the way you are working sounds familiar to me. And it sounds like it's likely to serve those in your fellowship quite well.
Oh yeah. Well, that's why we need each other, right? That's why it's so like great to meet you, Joan, and like that why we have to keep working on, as the great Albert Einstein said, our work is really to keep widening out the circles of compassion. And it's not about what I'm doing, but like what we're doing together. And to me, it's not a self-oriented thing, but how do we help each other? And as the wonderful Ram Dass would say, how we're walking each other home, like that we have to, do this together. This is not about a race or a competition, but actually turning a light to where it isn't activity, where we're actually realizing, moving from fixing into supporting, and what is supportive, and even asking that question, like, what is supportive in this moment, and then in this moment, and then in this moment. I mean, to me, it's such a wonderful thing to keep super alive, and as I like to say, and kind of jazzy.
Oh yes, I say spicy, but jazzy, so good. I love that.
I like spicy too.
Oh, I'm curious about that, especially those that are first entering, either like first encountering you, or at the beginning of the program, of the year program. If you see common themes, coming from the kind of coaching world, some of the words that are used to describe like perfectionism and imposter syndrome, like they're sort of these buzzy terms. And they're somewhat helpful ways to describe thought and emotion patterns for sure. But I'm really curious from your lens, from the Zen Buddhist lens, like how you describe the stories that people are bringing with them to your fellowship that are causing the most suffering. Like how do you describe them, and what are common ones you see arise,
Yeah, well, for me, it's kind of baked into what the whole thing is about, which is really looking at what causes our suffering and what our suffering is. And, to me, I love the story of the Buddha where, he was a person like you or I, just kind of walking around and trying to figure it out. And he was trying this app and that app and this self-care, this self-compassion, tried a lot of different things, actually. And in the historical story, he tried all different things. So just to me, as a contemporary story, like many of us are like, what can help, a self-help book, a podcast, anything. I'll go on a retreat, I'll go to Costa Rica, ayahuasca, like, I don't know. And so he was a person like that, looking to what would touch him deeply. And at a certain point, he realized, my goodness, I have to just stay put. And so that he sat under what's called the Bodhi tree, which is a fig tree. And he just realized he was just being so motivated by what he was afraid of. And so like fear was pushing him. And then wanting what's next, and the lack of patience. And so he decided to sit down until he could see through what he was afraid of. I mean, to me, that story is so powerful.
Yes.
And then he reached down, and in the morning, he just sat there all night, and he reaches down and touches the earth, and he said, oh, the house builder is seen at last. The ridgepole is shattered. Never more will you build a house of sorrow. So this is like a fancy way of saying, my goodness, I realize I'm creating my suffering. I'm creating the sorrow. My goodness, I'm not going to do that anymore. So it's like that moment of like deep responsibility. Whew. And so the first nobility is that we suffer, that we all have it. Like we are, the people that we serve have it, the people that we're serving with have it. That we all suffer. And the people that we are alongside us suffer, that the people we're serving suffer. And it's just amazing. And so like it's just so humbling. So the nobility of it to me is so important to recognize, like, oh, you have something, I have something, we all have something. And then the second nobility is these, as actually I call them the three giants, which is like our greed, like we want something different, or just like make it better, make it better, make it better. Or our resentment, like the system sucks. I've heard that once or twice.
Yep.
And part of it's true. But often not to the degree. And then the delusion is that I'm alone. The fundamental delusion is I'm alone in all of it. Nobody knows, as Bessie Smith would sing, nobody knows the troubles I've seen. So I think that it's just really important to honor those. And we start with those in the fellowship, and we, have to, and we explore them both in our mentor groups and with our visiting faculty, and all of these different ways of just like in just one-to-one, in our peers. And it's just so important to realize, like, oh my goodness, we all struggle.
Yeah.
And it's like the simplest thing and the most complex.
And that's it.
To me, yeah, because we can't actually change, in my experience, and that was definitely true for me, that we can't change unless we really go through those first two nobilities, because then we can pivot. But often we want to like jump to like, I just want to feel good, I just want to eat ice cream, which is a very nice activity, but
Nothing wrong with ice cream. But if you think
no.
it'll be the solution to never suffering, well, might not get you there. Hey, I just are like really resonating with the desire to always be in motion. And I think that's a very common, relate to it strongly personally and see it on a lot of like my colleagues or clients and people I know from healthcare. It may be a bias of who goes through all the motions to even get into, say, medical school or like all the training. And then certainly in the culture and the pace that is requested keeps you there and rewards you externally and that sort of thing. And even this morning, speaking with someone who practices medicine and who, so much of what feels frustrating or difficult are the moments where there's nothing to do with the patient, but witness their suffering. And in fact, those sometimes become people's least favorite, or they're the difficult patients because you can't fix them. Like you said, this desire to try and fix. And if you don't have a fix or a solution, or they're not interested in the ones you're proposing, that those are difficult patients. Like you start to name it as the patient. And that's so, I mean, it's not only suffering for the clinician, unfortunately. Like you see how then we can start to perpetuate and stigmatize folks who don't have easy to fix problems. Like one of the things I explored actually with that client was like, what if nothing is fixable? Like what if it's the illusion is that there's ever a problem you can fix for somebody?
Totally.
It's a shift, but it's freeing.
Yeah, and what it would be like to even not even jump to fixing and just say, can we just sit here for a minute together and just be, and sometimes in just the uncomfortable reality that we're in. We were sitting with this parent and her child yesterday, and that we've had the privilege to be with over many months. And both the parent is dying of end stage COPD and has come to take care of their daughter who's dying of cancer.
Oh my.
And so the two of them weigh about, I don't know, 75 pounds each, maybe. And just like these ancient archetypal energy of just slowing down. And they have to both move so slowly. And they're so beautiful. And I was talking with them like about what's helpful. And the mother just said, this, that we get to be here. She's like, no one knows what will happen next. And yet we can be right here. And she's like, and I never thought that's what mattered most. We forget that that's actually always true. Even with physicians or parents or baristas or whoever it is, that we forget that actually we're still mammals, and just a moment of eye contact, just a moment of expressed attention is so delicious, both ways.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much, and it takes everything.
In the best way, though, in the most like energizing way, honestly, like shifting the thing that I have as sort of maybe my intention, my primary patient encounter outcome now is like, my job is to understand and connect. That's what I think of. And if I have done even a bit of that in the room with this person, mission accomplished. Didn't have to know the answer, didn't have to save the thing. Did I understand and connect even a little more? I'm just tucking into my pocket expressed attention as extra language that really nourishes me. And I think people think they don't have enough time to do that. They don't have time to slow down, Koshin. We're busy. And you must have heard this before from medical professionals.
Once or twice.
I have my emerging answers, and I'd love to know what your response is. As someone who teaches contemplative medicine, which speaks to a pace that may shift someone from I'm busy, I have no time.
Well, it's amazing, what we teach in some of the medical schools that we teach in. We teach about, what you can do in 3 minutes, because we know the average, in a hospital, the average doctor visit is 3 minutes. And there's so much you can do. First of all, I always love to tell this story because it's just amazing. When people are rounding around the beds and in the hospital, I remember it was an inpatient oncology floor, and this woman that I was working with who was in her process of dying from metastatic cancer, and she said, there's a new doctor. And I said, oh yeah, what's she like? And she's like, oh, she's amazing. And I said, what makes her amazing? She said, you'll see. And so the rounding comes in, like, and it almost has that sound,
Yes, it does.
Because it's so mechanical, right? And
Yeah.
like that, everyone's just like, and like talking about the person as if they're not there. And it was so great. So here they come, they go, and they stop for a moment, And this one doctor was just like looking at her while the attending was talking, looking at her, just like, and then they were gone. And the patient, she turns to me, she said, "Wasn't that amazing?" She's like, "Isn't she so great? We're so lucky she's here." So this is like, to me, like such a, and they were there about 1 minute and 30 seconds. But what happened was the contact was made in about a half a second. Just lifting the eyes and saying, "I see you." I caught up with that doctor later and I said, "How was that?" She said, "Oh, it's the only way that I could actually not lose my soul in this place."
Yeah.
She's like, because it's so magical to actually look at them, even if I can't do anything, but I'm actually wishing them well and letting them know I can offer them the respect and dignity of my gaze. And it's transformative to offer respect and dignity with our gaze. Actually feels good. You know, Choda and I, oh my goodness, we were invited to teach at a holistic nursing group once, which sounded great. And they were the first day in their orientation, kind of different kinds of trainings, and they were being told by the head trainer, so like imagine that there's an invisible wall around you, so no one's going to get you, and their feelings won't reach you, and you're totally protected. And as long as you keep up that invisible wall, you'll be able to be in this profession a long time. So that was the holistic nursing group, you know, so like that, the training we receive, or it reminds me of that physician, you know, who was told like, "Oh, the feelings will come back in about 20 years, you know," and which she reported they have not, right? And so I think that we have to help each other remember, you know, that word that is very popular these days, which is called mindfulness, comes from the Sanskrit word sati, which actually could also be translated as remember. And which I enjoy much more and much more active. Like, oh, I have to remember what's most important. I have to remember where I am. I have to remember what my values are. I have to remember to be integrated. Or if I'm feeling totally cuckoo, I have to like go into the stairway and just take a moment to pause, to be tender and caring. Yeah.
I love that. Like
So
the notion of, oh, I'm sorry, I spoke over you. I apologize. Keep going.
It's all good. No, I was just saying that you were asking about people who don't have time. That was your original question.
Yeah.
And but for me, the question of time is like, what do you want to do with the time that you have? You know, and how do you offer yourself and those you're with respect and dignity? Because as we know, we only have a certain amount of time, period. Yeah. So that's what I was going to add. Yeah.
I mean, and that's actually one of the most important to remember that, like that the notion that we don't have enough time is not like we all have this, well, none of us know exactly how much time we have, but like we just do have a finite quantity of time. So really what we're speaking to is the amount of tasks we think we have to jam into the time we have. And if we want, it's an invitation to decide what to do with our time, which is what you're speaking to so beautifully.
Totally.
I also love the notion of remembering in like an embodied way of like we're reattaching to ourselves, like, and that it's a practice, right? So it's not a static
Mm.
switch flipped, but something that you'll forget and remember, forget and remember.
The first use of that word, as far as I know, is around like between 5 and 6,000 years ago when the Egyptians started using that word, and it showed up in the story of Isis and Osiris, who were these amazing gods of the Egyptian time. And Osiris's brother was like jealous and like cut him up into a million pieces. You know how these things happen. And then he, hid all of his pieces all over the world. And Isis, who was his wife, was so bereft, of course, that her beloved was destroyed. And so, in her grief, she went out. She went on this epic quest to find all his pieces. And she remembered him literally. And to me, like, this is like the beautiful thing that, to me, like what your podcast and what all of us are looking to do is like actually to remember, which is actually a grief process, that we have to understand something that has been dismembered.
Yeah.
And how do we bring it back together? And eventually what Isis does is actually she remembers him literally and becomes pregnant and has this baby Horus, which, that famous eye, that Egyptian eye is their child's eye.
Oh.
So like a new life can only happen when we go through this remembering. So I love that, that was the kind of an earlier use of that word, which in some ways provides this powerful teaching of what we need to do in our own way, and mostly our ordinary way, about how do we remember what we've lost. Some of us, I know that, some of the fellows always are telling me like what they lost, what they knew when they were a little kid, the spark.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And it often can come back.
I wonder then, in our final minutes together, what is it that those that go through your program, what do they notice changes in how they show up to their work in medicine once they've come through your program?
Well, I would say that they say a lot of different things, but mostly they feel more alive throughout their life. And they feel mostly like that they have one life now. And they realize the preciousness of this one life, which is inside and out. And that their work, clinical work, is the fruit of all of that. And as we know, that the systems need lots of attention and change, and yet each individual inside of it is what is world. And so I think that they've taken on this beautiful sense of responsibility. And what's also incredible to see is like the first cohort and now the second cohort have really stayed connected and really keep embodying what fellowship is, and to really supporting one another, because actually the road is long. And it's so beautiful to see them remembering that we need each other and it's worth putting the effort in.
That's so, I get hope thinking about how that's happening in the world, and it sounds like many of them at least are re-entering or continuing in those same clinical spaces, and are nourished to do so, because often what happens is people leave, which is also very valid. And yet, if we can sustain and nourish those to stay and do what they can to shift, otherwise, how does the system change, you know?
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
Yeah. We need everybody.
Yes. Okay, well, this was a very grounding conversation. I don't know if you can tell, but I usually talk at a quicker cadence, and I feel like I've had this opportunity to pause and slow down. Like my body feels more solid. I've been zooming all day, and this has felt so grounding. So thank you for that gift. I was not expecting, honestly. And yes, so for anyone who's listening who's interested, how would they find you? And I will put the links in the show notes and all of that, but also where would they find opportunities to learn from you and your center?
Yeah, so on Instagram, New York Zen Center, or myself, Koshin Paley Ellison, our Contemplative Medicine Fellowship, and all of our other offerings, including our 90-day Zen practice periods, are all at zencare.org. And the fellowship begins every July. And so just to consider that. And also a book that might be useful for folks as a resource. I have a new book that is actually based on the curriculum of the fellowship, which is called Untangled, Walking the Eightfold Path to Clarity, Courage, and Compassion. And that is available on ebook and regular books and Audible.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for the gift of your time and attention. Any parting words? What would you like those listening, these humans in healthcare out there doing their best? What would you like to offer as parting words to them?
Just to remember that most of us are clear, and yet it takes courage. These are the 3 words from the subtitle of my book, but they are there for a reason, because most of us are clear about what the problem is, or kind of clear. And it's so important for myself and for everyone I know to have that courage to meet it through our action. Like, it's not enough just to stay in it, because otherwise we just hang out and ruminate, and it's terrible. And to have that compassion, and then to me, to realize that, oh my goodness, like, you struggle and I struggle, and we can be courageously compassionate together. And so to find your people, this is what I really encourage the most. Find your people who can support you and that you can support equally. And to me, this is how we create a more courageous and compassionate and loving world. We need to feel that support on both of our shoulders, that people are there.
So nourishing. Thank you so much. I've so appreciated our time together.
Thank you, Joan. So great.